By the end of that afternoon, the dock was quiet, in a way men remembered for years. The 290-pound dockworker finished his shift without another word. Bruce Lee left without raising his voice, without witnesses agreeing on exactly what they saw. Only the result was clear. No fight was recorded, no report was filed. Yet the crew understood something had shifted, that strength had been measured, and something heavier than muscle had won. The dock did not advertise itself as dangerous. It did not need to. By mid-morning, the air was already thick with salt, diesel, and repetition. Cranes moved on schedules older than most of the men guiding them. Pallets studded into place. Ropes burned through calloused palms. The work did not reward speed. It rewarded endurance, memory, and an understanding of weight, how it shifted, how it resisted, how it punished mistakes. Hierarchy on the dock was informal but exact. No badges, no titles. Authority came from years without injury, from shoulders that stayed level under load, from a reputation built quietly across thousands of identical motions. The men knew who could be trusted to take the heavy end of a lift without comment. They also knew who not to question. Size mattered here. Not in theory, but in practice. A larger man could stabilize a load by standing where others stepped away. He could absorb momentum instead of fighting it. Strength was visible, measurable, and rarely debated. The dockworker everyone deferred to weighed close to 300 pounds. Not soft weight, working weight. The kind earned over decades of lifting freight that did not want to be lifted. His presence alone adjusted behavior. Conversations shortened when he approached. New hires watched him more than the foreman. He did not posture. He did not need to. The dock had already agreed on his standing. Bruce Lee arrived as an outsider, though not announced as one. There was no entourage, no formal introduction. He was not there to prove anything. To many, he appeared misplaced, slight, compact, dressed simply. He moved with economy, but not in a way that drew immediate attention. On a dock, efficiency is common. Excess is what stands out. Some later said he had come to observe. Others said he was passing through. No one could confirm the purpose of his presence with certainty. That ambiguity mattered. The dock respected function. Purpose was expected to be obvious. Lee did not disrupt the workflow. He did not speak loudly. He stood where he was told to stand, waited where waiting was required. He watched hands, not faces, movements, not declarations. To the dock, this registered as neutrality, neither threat nor authority. Yet proximity does things, especially in places governed by unspoken rules. The dockworker noticed him eventually, not immediately. Recognition came slowly, through contrast. The difference was not size alone. It was stillness. Lee did not brace himself the way smaller men did. He did not lean away from weight. He did not adjust his posture to compensate for presence. Nothing about the moment suggested confrontation. No raised voices, no gathering crowd. Just two men occupying the same operational space, one defined by mass and history, the other by something harder to name. By the time the shift reached its midpoint, the dock was still running on schedule. Loads were moving. Orders were being followed. But attention had begun to drift, not toward conflict, toward uncertainty. Recognition did not arrive all at once. For some, Bruce Lee was just another slight figure near the edge of the operation. For others, there was a delayed click-in association formed from photographs, magazine profiles, stories overheard but never verified. Even then, no one spoke it aloud. Names carried less weight on the dock than function, and Lee had not yet declared one. The dockworker's awareness came differently. It was not about fame. It was about spatial intuition. He noticed that Lee did not yield ground unnecessarily, not in defiance, not as a statement, simply as a matter of balance. When equipment passed close, Lee adjusted with precision rather than retreat. When space narrowed, he did not tense, he recalculated. This registered as irregular. The dockworker had learned long ago that uncertainty was usually weakness. Smaller men compensated. They telegraphed caution. They looked for permission. Lee did none of that. He did not assert himself, but he did not concede either. The moment itself was unceremonious. A path narrowed between stacked cargo. The dockworker moved through it as he always had, expecting the slight man to step aside. Lee did not step forward. He did not step back. He remained where he was, angled just enough to allow passage without submission. The dockworker slowed. That alone drew notice. He reached out, not with force, not with malice, but with familiarity. A hand to the sleeve. A corrective gesture, common on the dock. A reminder of order. Witnesses later disagreed on intent. Some said it was dismissive. Others said it was reflexive. No one described it as aggressive. That was not how authority operated here. It did not need to escalate. Bruce Lee turned his head slightly. Not fully, just enough. There was no verbal exchange that could be reliably quoted. No insult, no warning. If words were spoken, they were quiet enough to dissolve into the machinery and surf. What remained was posture. Lee did not pull away. He did not stiffen. The sleeve did not wrinkle under tension. The contact existed, and then it didn't. The dockworker's hand returned to his side. He did not laugh. He did not continue forward. That pause lasted less than a breath, but it interrupted the rhythm of the shift. A few men looked up from their tasks. A forklift idled longer than necessary. The dockworker adjusted his stance as if reassessing the ground beneath him. Whatever had been expected did not arrive. There was no challenge declared, no demand made, only a recalibration subtle, incomplete, unresolved. Bruce Lee resumed his attention elsewhere, as if the interaction had concluded according to plan. The dockworker remained where he was for a moment longer, then took a different route around the cargo. No one commented, but the dock had noticed something it could not easily name and could not ignore. Work continued because it had to. The dock did not pause for ambiguity. Cargo still needed to move, schedules still pressed. Yet something had entered the environment that could not be cleared away with routine. It lingered in the spaces between actions, in the way men looked up sooner than necessary, in how voices failed to fully return. No one gathered. No circle formed. There was no open challenge that demanded spectators. And yet, attention began to align, subtly, without instruction. Men found reasons to work closer than usual. Tasks overlapped. The dock compressed. This was not curiosity. It was calibration. The dockworker resumed his duties, but the economy of his movement had shifted. He checked footing more often. He adjusted grip before committing weight. These were small changes, nearly invisible but unmistakable to men who had spent years reading bodies under strain. Bruce Lee remained within sight, but not central. He did not claim space. He did not withdraw from it either. He worked when work was required of him. When there was nothing to do, he observed. His attention was not fixed on the dockworker, yet it did not wander aimlessly. It moved with intent, tracking structure and flow rather than individuals. The imbalance unsettled people more than a confrontation would have. A fight would have restored familiar logic, size versus speed, strength against resistance, a winner defined by impact. But this situation offered no such framework. There was no escalation to prepare for, no resolution to anticipate. The dockworker felt the shift before anyone else named it. He had lived his life as a known quantity. Men adjusted around him. Obstacles moved or broke. Today, something had not. He tested this indirectly, passing closer than necessary, standing where clearance was tight, creating situations where smaller men usually retreated. Each time, Lee adjusted just enough to neutralize the test without acknowledging it. No collision, no avoidance, only efficiency. The crowd registered this pattern without articulating it. Repetition made it undeniable. each non-event stacked onto the last, building a quiet tension that did not release. Somewhere in the background, a radio played, then stopped. No one remembered turning it off. Sound seemed to thin, as if the dock itself were listening. Still, no one stepped back. No one intervened. The men understood that whatever was happening could not be managed from the outside. This was not about stopping something. It was about seeing where it went. The dockworker finally faced Lee directly, not squared, not aggressive, simply a line. Witnesses later described a look that was not anger, not challenge, but calculation, an attempt to restore certainty, to force clarity into a situation that had refused it. Bruce Lee met the alignment without change. His breathing remained even. His weight distributed in a way that did not advertise readiness. The moment stretched not because of drama, but because neither man rushed to resolve it. Then, without announcement, something decisive occurred, and the dock did not look away. No signal marked the beginning. There was no shift in stance that clearly announced intention. No tightening of fists. No sudden acceleration. Men later tried to reconstruct the moment and failed not because it was fast, but because it was spare. Too little happened for memory to hold on to. Bruce Lee did not advance. That was the detail most agreed upon. What followed was not a contest of force, but of structure. The dockworker initiated contact again, this time with more certainty in his reach, not violence confirmation. A test to reassert the rule that mass, when applied, decided outcomes. The contact did not travel where it was sent. Witnesses described the sensation secondhand, as if recounting something they felt rather than saw. The dockworker's balance altered, not abruptly, not dramatically. His weight shifted into a space that no longer supported it. There was no throw. There was no strike. Bruce Lee's hands were visible, yet not grasping. His feet remained where they were, yet the dockworker's alignment failed him. It was as if the larger man had been briefly disconnected from his own structure, his strength present but unassigned. The dockworker took a step back, then another. He did not fall. That mattered. Falling could be dismissed as accident. What happened instead was worse for certainty. He stopped advancing because he no longer knew where to put his weight. Bruce Lee released contact as soon as the balance broke. No follow-through, no display. The demonstration ended at the moment its purpose was fulfilled. Silence followed, not from shock, but from processing. Men looked at the ground, at each other, at the dockworker's feet. They searched for evidence of force and found none. The dockworker stood still. His chest rose and fell more noticeably now. Not from exertion, but recalibration. He flexed his hands once, as if checking for injury that was not there. Bruce Lee had already shifted his attention away. This was not dismissal. It was completion. The dockworker did not attempt again. He did not speak. He adjusted his clothing, returned to his task, and resumed lifting with the same strength, but without the same certainty. No one applauded. No one reacted outwardly. The dock absorbed the moment the way it absorbed everything else, by continuing. But something fundamental had changed. The demonstration had not shown what Bruce Lee could do. It had shown what he did not need to do. And that absence carried more weight than any visible force. The dockworker's strength did not leave him. That was the detail many remembered most clearly in the years that followed. He continued to lift what he had lifted before. He carried loads that would have buckled other men. His hands remained steady. His back held. Nothing visible had been taken from him. And yet something essential had loosened. Confidence on the dock was never about bravado. It was about predictability, the belief that force, when applied, would behave as expected. That belief had been interrupted, quietly but decisively. The dockworker now moved with a fraction more caution, a fraction more calculation. These were not weaknesses, but they were changes. On the dock, change was noticed. He did not seek explanation. He did not ask questions. He did not attempt to reframe the moment through humor or dismissal. Silence, in this case, was not pride. It was acknowledgement. The crew absorbed the lesson in the same way. No one discussed techniques. No one speculated openly. There was no language for what had occurred that fit the dock's vocabulary of effort and resistance. The men simply adjusted their understanding of hierarchy. Authority had not been challenged publicly. It had been bypassed. Bruce Lee remained present only briefly after that. He did not linger to consolidate influence. He did not engage in follow-up demonstrations. He finished what he was there to do, whatever that purpose had been, and prepared to leave. As he passed through the dock, men stepped aside without realizing they were doing so. Not out of fear, out of instinct. The same instinct that had once yielded to mass, now yielded to something subtler. The dockworker noticed this as well. There was no resentment in his expression, only a quiet narrowing of attention, as if something long assumed had been set down carefully and examined for the first time. He did not watch Lee leave. He kept working, but in the days that followed, stories began to settle into place, not as rumors, but as shared understandings. The dock did not elevate Lee into myth immediately. It did something more restrained. It remembered. The incident became a reference point, invoked without detail. Like that day, someone would say, and others would nod. No embellishment was needed. The power of the moment lay in its refusal to expand. What collapsed that day was not a man. It was an assumption. And assumptions, once broken quietly, do not rebuild easily. Years later, the dock looked the same to anyone passing through. The crane still traced the same arcs. The water still carried the same smell of metal and salt. Men still worked by rhythm rather than clock, learning the job through repetition more than instruction. Nothing about the place advertised that anything unusual had ever occurred there. Yet among those who stayed long enough, the story persisted. It was never told the same way twice. Details softened or disappeared. Some could no longer remember the season. Others disagreed on the time of day. The 290-pound dockworker grew heavier in recollection, then lighter. Bruce Lee's movements became harder to describe, then impossible. What remained constant was the shape of the outcome. No one remembered a fight. No one remembered a victory pose. They remembered a moment when certainty failed without spectacle. Younger men heard the story as a caution, though it was never framed that way. Veterans told it without emphasis, often while working, as if it were part of the dock's operating history. The lesson was embedded, not explained. Strength mattered. Experience mattered. But they were not complete on their own. The dockworker retired years later with his reputation intact. He was still respected, still remembered as reliable. The incident did not diminish him in the eyes of the crew. If anything, it deepened him. Those who worked closest to him noticed that he taught differently afterward, not by asserting, but by allowing others to find their balance under load. Bruce Lee's name, meanwhile, traveled far beyond the dock. His philosophy became associated with speed, precision, and economy. But among those who had been there, the dock story stood apart from films and demonstrations. It was never used as proof of greatness. It was used as evidence of restraint. The story survived because it resisted dramatization. It did not grow louder with time. It grew quieter, more distilled. Until what remained was not an event, but a principle witnessed. That dominance does not require noise. That mastery does not announce itself. That the most decisive moments often leave the fewest marks. On the dock, shifts continued. New men arrived. Old ones left. The water carried everything away eventually, but every so often, when space tightened or weight shifted unexpectedly, someone would adjust their footing with unusual care, and no one would explain why.